Before you do anything else, stop. Not for a second, not halfway, completely. Stop scrolling, stop planning, stop distracting yourself from what you already feel rising inside you. Because if this moment found you, not earlier, not later, but now, then something in you is ready to hear what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You feel too much. And somewhere along the way, you were taught that this was wrong, that your reactions were excessive, that your emotions were inconvenient, that your depth made things harder than they needed to be. So you adapted. You learned to silence yourself, to minimize what you felt, to pretend you were unaffected when inside everything was moving. But Carl Jung would look at you and say something that would challenge everything you've believed about yourself. You are not broken, you are unfiltered. And that changes everything, because the world does not reward depth. It rewards functionality. It rewards speed, control, detachment. It teaches people to operate on the surface because the surface is predictable. It can be managed. It can be performed. But you were never built for that. You were built to perceive what others overlook, to feel what others suppress, to recognize what others cannot name. And that is not a flaw. It is a different architecture of consciousness. Jung described this as a psyche oriented toward the unconscious, a mind that does not stop at what is visible, but moves beneath it, into meaning, into symbol, into the emotional field that surrounds every interaction. This is why you notice things others don't, why you feel shifts in energy before words are spoken, why you can sit in a room and sense tension no one acknowledges, why someone can say, "I'm fine," and something in you knows they're not. You are not imagining it. You are perceiving it. But here is the cost no one explains. When you perceive more, you carry more. Not just your emotions, but the residue of others. Their pain, their confusion, their unspoken conflicts. And because you were never taught how to process that, you internalized it. You made it yours. And over time, it became heavy. This is where the collapse happens. Not because you are weak, but because you have been operating without boundaries in a world that does not understand your capacity. And eventually, your system overloads. You feel drained, overwhelmed, disconnected, not because you are too sensitive, but because you have been absorbing without filtering. And this is the moment most people misinterpret. They think the solution is to shut down, to feel less, to harden. But that is not the solution. That is self-abandonment. Because your sensitivity is not the problem. Your lack of integration is. Jung understood that what makes a person powerful is not what they feel, but what they can hold consciously. And right now, you feel everything, but you don't yet know how to hold it. So it spills, it overwhelms, it turns inward and becomes anxiety, exhaustion, confusion. But when that same sensitivity becomes conscious, it transforms. It becomes precision, clarity, depth, the ability to see through illusion, to understand people beyond their words, to navigate life with a level of awareness most people never access. This is why the most perceptive people often go through the darkest internal phases, because before your perception becomes a gift, it feels like a burden. Before you learn to hold it, it feels like it is holding you. And this is where everything begins to shift. The moment you stop trying to feel less and start learning how to feel without losing yourself. Because the goal is not to reduce your depth. It is to stabilize it, to create an internal structure strong enough to contain what you perceive, without being consumed by it. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by removing parts of yourself, but by integrating them, learning where you end and others begin, learning what is yours and what is not, learning to observe without absorbing. And when that happens, your sensitivity changes form. It stops being overwhelming and becomes powerful. You walk into a room and feel everything, but you are not destabilized by it. You sense emotions, but you are not responsible for them. You understand people, but you are not controlled by their state. You become grounded, clear, present, and from that place, you are no longer the one who suffers from depth. You are the one who uses it. Because the truth is, the world does not need more people who feel less. It needs people who feel deeply and remain stable. People who can perceive without collapsing, who can understand without losing themselves, who can hold complexity without escaping into numbness. And that is what you are becoming, not by accident, but by necessity, because the path you are on was never meant to be easy. It was meant to make you aware. So if you have spent your life feeling like you don't fit, like you are too intense, too emotional, too aware, hear this clearly. You were never too much. You were just never taught how to hold what you carry. And now you are learning, and that changes everything. If this resonates with you, if you've always felt this difference but never had the words for it, comment, Walvin, not as a trend, but as recognition that you see yourself now, and you are done trying to be less. Stay here, because this is not where your sensitivity breaks you. This is where it becomes your strength. There is something no one tells you about being this person, not in a way that actually honors the reality of it, because it is easy to romanticize sensitivity, easy to call it a gift, easy to label it as rare and powerful, and move on without ever acknowledging what it actually feels like to live inside it every single day. But you know the truth. You know what it costs. You know what it feels like to walk into a room and instantly feel everything shift inside you without understanding why. To absorb tension that no one names, to carry emotions that were never yours to begin with, to leave conversations more exhausted than you should be, replaying words, tones, silences long after everyone else has forgotten them. You know what it feels like to need space, real space, silence, distance, stillness, not as a preference, but as a necessity, just to return to yourself. And you also know the guilt that follows, the quiet voice that asks why you can't just be like everyone else, why things affect you more, why you need more time, more quiet, more distance to process what others seem to move through effortlessly. That voice is not truth. It is conditioning. It is the result of living in a world that was not designed for your level of perception and then being told that the problem must be you. Carl Jung understood this more deeply than most. He saw that certain individuals are not simply more emotional. They are structured differently. Their entire psyche is oriented toward depth rather than surface, toward meaning rather than function, toward the unseen rather than the obvious. And because of that, they live in a constant tension, a tension between who they are and what the world expects them to be. And for many years, they lose that tension. They collapse into adaptation. They learn to shrink, to filter themselves, to soften their reactions, hide their perceptions, pretend not to notice what they clearly feel, not because they are weak, but because they are trying to survive in environments that cannot hold them. And over time, something dangerous happens. They begin to identify with the wound. They stop seeing their sensitivity as perception and start seeing it as damage. They begin to believe that the reason they feel so much is because something is wrong with them, that they are too much, too intense, too complicated, too difficult to understand, and at the same time, not enough, not strong enough, not stable enough, not capable of functioning like others. This contradiction becomes their identity, and once it settles into the unconscious, it starts to shape everything. Their relationships, their boundaries, their decisions. They become the ones who give more, feel more, carry more, not because they choose to, but because something in them believes that is their role. And this is where the real danger lies. Not in your sensitivity, but in the meaning you gave to it. Because when sensitivity is misunderstood, it becomes self-abandonment. You start managing yourself for others, shrinking your reactions, silencing your truth, adapting your presence so that others feel comfortable, while you slowly disconnect from yourself. And Jung warned about this directly. He said that what remains unconscious does not disappear. It organizes your life. And if the belief "I am too much" lives in your unconscious, you will build a life that confirms it. You will choose environments that cannot hold off you. You will stay in relationships where your depth is not met. You will continue to feel misunderstood, not because you are meant to be, but because something in you is still operating from that original wound. And this is where everything begins to change. The moment you see it, clearly, without distortion, without judgment. You realize something that was always true, but never fully conscious. There was never anything wrong with your depth. The problem was never your sensitivity. The problem was that no one showed you how to hold it. Because sensitivity without structure becomes overwhelm, but sensitivity with awareness becomes power. And this is what Jung called individuation, not becoming someone new, but becoming whole, learning how to exist as yourself, without fragmentation, without shrinking, without abandoning parts of yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you. And this requires something most people avoid: responsibility, not for what you feel, but for how you relate to what you feel, learning what is yours and what is not, learning how to observe without absorbing, learning how to remain present without losing yourself. And when that begins to happen, your entire experience shifts. You still feel deeply, you still perceive everything, but you are no longer overwhelmed by it. You are no longer defined by it. You become grounded, stable, clear. You walk into a room and feel everything, but you remain centered. You understand people, do not carry them, but you see what others cannot see, but you are no longer burdened by it. And that is the transformation, from unconscious sensitivity to conscious perception, from overwhelm to awareness, from self-doubt to self-trust. And from that place, something incredible happens. You stop trying to be less and start becoming more. Not louder, not harder, but more aligned, more honest, more yourself. Because the truth is, the world does not need you to be less sensitive. It needs you to be fully aware of what you carry, to embody it without being consumed by it, to use it without losing yourself in it. That is rare, that is powerful, and that is exactly what you are learning to become. So if this landed somewhere real inside you, if you recognized yourself in this without needing explanation, comment. Free to, not for anyone else, but as a signal to yourself that you see it now, that you understand it differently, and that you are no longer willing to shrink to fit into a world that never understood you to begin with. Stay with this, because this is not the part where your sensitivity breaks you. This is the part where it finally becomes your strength. There is a level of experience that most people only touch once or twice in their lives, and then there are people like you who live inside it. You don't just pass through moments of depth, you exist in them. Every piece of music that opens something in your chest for no clear reason, every quiet moment that suddenly feels overwhelming with meaning, every time someone else's pain moves through you as if it were your own. These are not random reactions. These are not emotional excesses. These are what Carl Jung called encounters with the numinous, moments where the psyche touches something deeper than logic, something that cannot be explained but can never be denied. And for most people, those moments are rare. For you, they are constant. This is why your life feels different, because you are not living only on the surface of reality. You are moving through layers that most people never access. You are perceiving meaning where others see events. You are feeling connections where others feel nothing. You are standing in spaces where the invisible becomes real, and that changes everything. But here is where the truth becomes difficult, because living this way is not just beautiful, it is heavy, it is exhausting, it is isolating in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who has never experienced it. And if you are honest with yourself, there have been moments where you wished it would stop, moments where you wished you could feel less, notice less, care less, moments where you looked at people who seem unaffected by everything and thought, maybe they have it easier. That thought is one of the most dangerous turning points in the life of a deeply sensitive person, because it is the moment where you begin to reject your own nature, not consciously, but subtly. You begin to suppress what you feel, to question your reactions, to minimize your perception, to adapt yourself to a world that does not understand your depth. And over time, this creates a split inside you, a division between what you experience and what you allow yourself to express, and that division becomes pain. Jung warned about this directly. He said that when something within you remains unrecognized, it does not disappear. It turns inward. It begins to shape your life from the unconscious. It becomes anxiety, confusion, emotional overload, not because something is wrong with you, but because something true is being denied. This is why understanding your sensitivity is not enough. You have to learn how to live with it, and that requires something most people are never taught. You have to stop running from what you feel, because every time you feel something intense and immediately distract yourself, you are teaching your system that the feeling is dangerous, that it must be escaped, that you are not capable of holding it. And over time, that creates dependence. You need noise to avoid silence. You need distraction to avoid awareness. You need other people to regulate what you never learned to regulate yourself. And this is where your greatest strength turns into your greatest instability, not because of the feeling itself, but because of your relationship to it. Jung offered a different path. He called it active imagination, the practice of turning toward the feeling instead of away from it, of sitting with what arises without immediately trying to fix it, explain it, or transfer it to someone else, of asking, what is this actually showing me? Because every intense emotion carries information. Every wave that moves through you is connected to something deeper, and when you stop avoiding it, it begins to reveal itself. This is not comfortable. In fact, it is one of the most difficult things a deeply sensitive person can learn, because there is a fear that lives underneath all of this. A fear that if you truly allow yourself to feel everything, you will be overwhelmed by it, that it will consume you, that you will fall into it and not come back. That fear is real, but it is also incomplete, because what Jung discovered, and what countless people have experienced, is that the psyche is not designed to destroy itself through feeling. It is designed to transform through it. The feeling does not break you. The avoidance of it does, because when you avoid what you feel, it accumulates, it builds, it becomes heavier, more confusing, more overwhelming. But when you face it, something unexpected happens. It begins to move, it changes form, it reveals layers, and instead of drowning in it, you expand around it. Your capacity increases, your awareness deepens, your relationship with yourself becomes more stable. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold two opposing states at once, the intensity of the feeling and the fear of it, without collapsing into either. And when you learn to stay in that tension, without escaping, without rushing to resolve it, something new emerges, not something forced, not something controlled, but something real, a deeper understanding, a clearer sense of self, a stability that was not there before. And from that place, your sensitivity changes. It stops being something that overwhelms you and becomes something you can work with. You begin to feel deeply, but remain grounded. You begin to perceive everything, but not be consumed by it. You begin to understand people without carrying them. And this is where everything shifts, because when a deeply sensitive person becomes integrated, their presence changes. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to explain anything. People feel it. They feel the calm, the clarity, the depth that no longer collapses into overwhelm. They feel safe without knowing why. They feel understood without needing to explain themselves. They feel something different, something rare. This is not performance. This is not personality. This is presence. And Jung observed this again and again. He saw that when a person becomes whole, it affects everyone around them, not through effort, but through being. And for someone who has spent their entire life feeling like they were too much, this realization is everything, because you begin to understand. You were never the problem. You were the potential. You were the depth the room could not yet hold. And now, you are learning how to hold it yourself. So here is something real you can take with you. The next time you feel overwhelmed, do not run. Do not distract. Do not immediately reach for something to escape it. Pause. Sit with it. Breathe into it. And ask, what is this trying to show me? Not once, not quickly, but patiently. Because the answer is not always immediate, but it is always there. And every time you do this, you build something. Not control, not suppression, but capacity, the ability to feel without losing yourself. And that is the difference between suffering your sensitivity and mastering it. If this spoke to something real inside you, comment 20, not as a number, but as a moment. The moment you stop running and start understanding. Because this is not where your depth overwhelms you. This is where it becomes your power. There is a moment where everything begins to shift. Not outside, but inside you. And it starts with something so small, so simple, that most people would ignore it. The next time the intensity rises, the next time your chest feels heavy, your mind overwhelmed, your emotions too loud, I want you to do something different. Instead of saying, I feel too much, say this, I am receiving important information. Because that is exactly what is happening. Your system is not breaking, it is working. Your nervous system, your perception, your awareness, they are processing signals that most people are not tuned to receive. You are not reacting to nothing. You are responding to layers of reality that exist beneath the surface. Subtle shifts, emotional currents, unspoken truths that move through people and environments without ever being named. And when you label that as too much, you turn your own intelligence into an enemy. But when you recognize it as information, everything changes. You stop resisting, you stop fighting yourself, and the energy that was once trapped in that internal war becomes available. Available for clarity, for insight, for connection, for creation. This is where your power begins, because a deeply sensitive person who is not fighting themselves becomes something rare. Someone who sees clearly, feels deeply, and remains grounded. And let me tell you something you may not fully realize yet. The kind of relationships you are capable of having are not normal. They are not common. They are not surface level, convenient, predictable interactions. They are real, raw, transformative. You are capable of making another human being feel seen in a way they may have never experienced before. You are capable of listening beyond words, of feeling what someone cannot say, of creating a space where truth becomes safe. And when you show up fully, without apologizing for your depth, you change the room, not by effort, but by presence. Jung described this as something extraordinary, when two people meet, not at the level of persona, but at the level of the soul. Something new is created, something that did not exist before that moment of contact. You were built for that kind of connection, not for performance, not for superficial conversations, but for something real. Something that leaves people different after they experience you. And that is why your sensitivity matters. That is why it exists. Not as a burden, but as a bridge. So if you are ready to stop shrinking, if you are ready to stop managing yourself to make others comfortable, if you are ready to fully arrive as who you are, comment 777. Not for validation, but as a declaration. Mind, soul, purpose, aligned. Because something happens when you make that decision. You stop hiding, and you start becoming. Now listen carefully, because this is one of the most important truths Jung ever touched. The greatest danger for a sensitive person is not that the world misunderstands them. It is that they begin to agree. Read that again. Because the moment you accept the idea that your depth is a flaw, you disconnect from your own truth. You stop trusting what you feel. You stop going inward. You stop exploring the very places inside you where your power lives. And slowly, you go quiet. Not externally, but internally. You stop listening to yourself. You stop honoring your perception. You start living according to what is acceptable, instead of what is true. And every time that happens, the world loses something. Because people like you are rare. Not because you are better, but because you are willing to feel, and feeling, real feeling, is something most people spend their lives avoiding. So do not go quiet. Not now. Not after everything you have already faced. Not after all the moments where you could have shut down, numbed out, stopped caring, and you didn't. You stayed open, even when it hurt, even when it was heavy, even when no one understood. That is strength, not weakness. And now, we arrive at the truth that changes everything. The thing Jung understood at the deepest level. The thing that transforms everything you carry. The wound that made you feel too much is the same place your power was born. Your sensitivity did not appear randomly. It was shaped, formed, refined, through experience. through moments where you had to feel more than you wanted to, where you had to read the room before you could understand it, where your awareness became your protection, where your perception became your survival, and that created something inside you, something precise, something powerful, something real. Jung called this the wound that becomes the gift, and the path is not to erase it, not to heal by becoming less, but to integrate it, to understand it, to carry it with awareness instead of fear, because when you do, it transforms. What once overwhelmed you begins to guide you. What once confused you begins to clarify things others cannot see. What once felt like a burden becomes your greatest strength. And suddenly, your life changes, not because the world changed, but because you did. And here is something I want you to see clearly before this ends. Look at the people in your life, the ones who come to you when they are breaking, the ones who call you late at night, the ones who sit with you and suddenly say things they have never said to anyone before. That is not coincidence. That is recognition. They feel something in you. Safety, depth, presence, truth. They are not drawn to you despite your sensitivity. They are drawn to you because of it. You are someone who makes truth feel safe, someone who allows people to drop the mask, someone who creates space in a world that rarely offers it. And that is rare. So stop questioning it. Stop minimizing it. Stop apologizing for it. Because you are not too much. You are precisely tuned. And in a world that has learned to feel less, you are someone who still feels fully. And that is not something to fix. That is something to become. So breathe. Stay present. Trust what you feel. Because this is not where your sensitivity overwhelms you. This is where it becomes your power. And everything begins to change from here. There is one more truth. And this one cuts deeper than everything else. Because it is not about the world. It is about you. About the one place where even the most aware, most sensitive, most perceptive people still lose themselves. Without realizing it. The habit of abandoning yourself in order to maintain emotional peace around you. You know exactly what this looks like. Someone shifts their energy, and before you even understand what you feel, you are already adjusting, softening your tone, changing your words, rewriting your reactions so that they are easier to receive. Someone is uncomfortable, and you become responsible for fixing it. Someone misunderstands you, and instead of standing in your truth, you begin to question yourself. Maybe I said it wrong. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I should have been different. And, slowly, almost invisibly, you disappear from your own experience, not because you are weak, but because you feel everything so precisely that you learn to prioritize harmony over truth. And Jung saw this pattern with absolute clarity. He called it the loss of self to the collective, the moment where your identity becomes shaped not by who you are, but by how others feel about you. And for a deeply sensitive person, this is one of the most dangerous places to live, because your gift, your ability to feel, to perceive, to understand, becomes inverted. Instead of being used for awareness, it is used for self-erasure. You stop asking, what is true for me, and start asking, what will keep everything around me stable? And that question, over time, disconnects you from yourself. This is not empathy. This is over-identification. This is when your nervous system becomes so attuned to others that it forgets how to stay rooted in you. And the cost of that is enormous, because every time you choose someone else's comfort over your own truth, you send a signal inward that your experience is secondary, that your voice is negotiable, that your presence must be adjusted to be accepted. And if that pattern continues, you begin to live a life that looks aligned on the outside, but feels empty on the inside, because you are no longer there. Jung warned that this is how the self fragments, not through trauma alone, but through repeated moments of quiet self-betrayal, moments where you knew what you felt and chose not to honor it, moments where you sensed the truth and chose not to speak it, moments where you felt the boundary and chose to dissolve it. And the tragedy is, most people will call this kindness. They will call you caring, understanding, easy to be around. But deep down, you know when you left yourself behind. So here is the shift. And it is not aggressive. It is not loud. It is not about becoming cold or disconnected. It is about something much more powerful. Staying with yourself while you are with others. Feeling what they feel without losing what you feel. Listening deeply without silencing your own voice. Being present without disappearing. This is integration. This is maturity. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about becoming whole. Because wholeness is not choosing between yourself and others. It is the ability to hold both without collapsing into either. And when you begin to live this way, something changes. You stop over-adjusting. You stop over-explaining. You stop carrying what was never yours. And your presence becomes different, stronger, clearer, more grounded. Not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself. And here is what most people don't expect. When you stop managing everyone else's emotional experience, you don't lose connection. You deepen it. Because now, when you speak, it is real. When you listen, it is grounded. When you show up, you are actually there. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who is adapting and someone who is present. This is where your sensitivity becomes clean, no longer tangled in responsibility, no longer burdened by over-identification, but clear, precise, powerful. And this is the final layer. You are not here to carry everyone. You are not here to regulate every room. You are not here to shrink so others can remain comfortable. You are here to be fully present in your own truth, while remaining open to the world. That is the balance. That is the work. That is the power. So tonight, I want you to notice one thing, not everything, just one. The next time you feel the impulse to adjust yourself for someone else, pause and ask, am I staying with myself right now? And whatever the answer is, honor it, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it is new, even if it disrupts what you are used to, because that moment, that small decision, is where your life begins to change. Not outside, inside, where it always starts. If you felt this, truly felt it, comment. 3 for you, not as a number, but as a commitment. To stop disappearing, to stop adjusting away from yourself, to stop trading your truth for temporary harmony. Because you were never meant to be the one who carries everything. You were meant to be the one who is fully here. And that is where your real power begins. There is one final layer, and this one changes everything, because it reveals the pattern that has been quietly shaping your entire life without you even realizing it. The belief that other people's emotions are your responsibility, not consciously, not in a way you would say out loud, but in the way you move, the way you react, the way you immediately adjust yourself when something shifts in the emotional atmosphere around you. Someone feels uncomfortable, and you try to fix it. Someone is upset, and you carry it. Someone is distant, and you question yourself. And what makes this so dangerous is that it feels like love. It feels like care. It feels like being a good person. But beneath that, there is something deeper, a pattern that was learned. At some point in your life, someone needed you to regulate them. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they were unstable. Maybe they depended on your sensitivity to stay balanced. And when you stepped in, when you soothed, when you adjusted, everything became calmer, safer, more predictable. And your mind made a connection, a silent contract. If I manage how others feel, I will be safe. If I prevent discomfort, I will be loved. If I carry the emotional weight, I will belong. And that contract has been running ever since. So take a breath, and if this is landing somewhere real inside you, comment. 140, not as a number, but as awareness. Because 144 represents structure, clarity, the moment you see what was invisible and begin to change it. And here is the truth you were never taught. There is a difference between empathy and merger. Empathy says, I can feel what you feel and remain myself. Merger says, I must fix what you feel or I will lose myself. And most deeply sensitive people live in merger without realizing it. They don't just understand others. They absorb them. They don't just feel the room. They become the room. And over time, this dissolves their boundaries completely. Jung described this clearly. The goal is not to become closed, not to stop feeling, not to harden yourself. The goal is to become permeable without becoming boundaryless, to feel everything without losing yourself in it. And this is one of the most important psychological tasks of your entire life. Learning to stand inside someone else's storm and not be swept away. Learning to love deeply without disappearing. Learning to be moved by the world without being controlled by it. And no, this does not happen overnight. This is not a quick shift. This is a process, a slow, honest, sometimes uncomfortable process of returning to yourself again and again until something stabilizes inside you, until you no longer react automatically, until you can feel everything and still remain grounded. And this is where the transformation happens. Because when you stop merging, your sensitivity becomes clear, clean, precise. You are no longer overwhelmed by others. You begin to understand them without carrying them. You begin to support without sacrificing yourself. You begin to love without losing your center. And that is power, real power. Now I want to leave you with something deeper, an image, because sometimes understanding is not enough. You need to feel it. Imagine the ocean. At the surface, there are waves, constant movement, sometimes calm, sometimes violent, always reacting to the wind, to the weather, to everything happening above. Most people live there, at the level of the waves. Their emotions rise and fall with circumstances. Their identity shifts with what happens around them. Their stability depends on external conditions. But beneath the surface, there is another reality, deeper, quieter, unshaken, and at the very bottom, there is the ocean floor, still, grounded, untouched by the chaos above. The storms exist, the waves are real, but they do not reach the depth. And this is where Jung believed the self resides, not above emotion, not disconnected from life, but rooted so deeply that nothing can pull you away from who you are. You will still feel everything. You will still experience the waves. That will never change. That is your nature. But you will no longer be only the wave. You will also be the depth, the foundation, the stillness beneath it all. And when you reach that place, something shifts permanently. You stop measuring yourself by how intense your feelings are, and start recognizing how grounded you are within them. You stop asking, "Why do I feel so much?" and start realizing, "I can hold this." You stop fearing your depth and start trusting it, because now it is no longer something that controls you. It is something you stand within, and this is who you are becoming. Not someone who feels less, but someone who is rooted more deeply. Not someone who avoids the waves, but someone who is no longer moved by them. So the next time everything feels intense, remember this: you are not just what you feel. You are what holds what you feel. And that is unshakable. So breathe, stay with yourself, go deeper, because you were never meant to. Live at the surface. You were made for the depth, and that depth is your power.